Hi, everyone. This week we are highlighting our first kingdom culture value, which is prayer fuels power. I can remember the first time that I ever had the realization that I was up against a spiritual power that was greater than my own personal power. Olivia and I had only been married a few years, and we were walking one of the young women that she was discipling through some deliverance. And I went to cast a demon out of this girl, and she begins writhing on the floor and swearing at me in this really growly voice. And I'm not going to lie, every hair on my body stood up. And while commanding this demon to leave, I was thinking to myself, uh-oh, what have I got myself into? There's a great story in the Gospels where Jesus' disciples had a very similar experience. Jesus had just returned from a literal mountaintop experience with Peter, James, and John. Jesus' clothing had been supernaturally bleached, and they had met Moses and Elijah, who had been dead for thousands of years, and they had audibly heard the voice of God. And when they come back down the mountain, they see the other 9 disciples in the middle of this crowd of people. Everybody's yelling. It's really chaotic. So Jesus walks over to find out what's going on. This man says to Jesus, "I came to find you so that you could cast a demon out of my son, but you weren't here. So what I did was I tried to get your disciples to cast the demon out, but they couldn't do it." Jesus seemed a little bit annoyed, but then ends up casting the demon out of this boy, who gets powerfully healed and set free. All is good. Jesus shows up and comes to the disciples' rescue. Afterward, the disciples, probably a little embarrassed, privately asked Jesus, "So what happened there? Why couldn't we cast that demon out? Why don't we have the spiritual power that you had? What's the difference between you and us?" And Jesus' response was very revealing. He says, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." So the difference, he said, between you and I is I pray. I spend time in the Father's presence speaking with him. So the lesson here is that if we want this kind of power over spiritual darkness, which we all need, it's only available through a depth of relationship with the Father. Have you ever been in a situation like the disciples where you needed spiritual power, but you lacked it? Maybe where you felt you were coming up against something that was more powerful than you in your own strength. If we're honest, I think we've probably all been there. Maybe not necessarily a deliverance session, but maybe whether it's battling accusation or insecurity or feelings of anxiety or even something more sinister like sickness or financial lack or maybe feelings of deep depression or even relational conflict that we can't seem to reconcile. We live in a world that is more influenced by spiritual forces than we sometimes realize. We face problems that can only be overcome through a greater spiritual power than what we have within ourselves. The encouragement from Jesus here is that spiritual power that's needed to overcome darkness is available for all of us, to not only live free in our own lives from evil forces, but to help other people get set free as well. But that power is only available out of the overflow of a depth of relationship with God. And that's the point that Jesus was making to the disciples in this situation. He says, it's only available as you consistently do what I do, he was saying, which was go to a quiet place and pray. If you're facing a challenge that seems more powerful than you, my question to you and our question to ourselves should always be, how often do you do what Jesus teaches in Matthew 6? Go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who's in secret. That's where the answer to the problem is found. It's ultimately a spiritual problem. Jesus says, your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Let's be people who develop a daily discipline of spending time alone with God in prayer. It's there that we have access to the spiritual power to not only enjoy God's best for our own lives, but to be able to help other people get set free as well. So stay tuned for another video coming from my amazing wife, Olivia, in a few days. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.